Hello, Facebook. Welcome to yet another edition of Ask NPR News. Thank you, everyone, for your questions so far. Keep them coming, and we'll try to get to them. Today on deck, your power panel is Craig Helmstetter from the APM Research Lab, Brianna Bierschbach, political reporter with NPR News, and I'm Michael Olson, digital editor with NPR News. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us. Thank you guys for coming. We have a couple questions off the top here, and then Craig has some interesting polling data that we're going to get to as well. So we're going to focus on the 2nd Congressional District, the 3rd Congressional District, and it's Trump Day in Minnesota. So we're going to take a look at how Trump is doing. He's flying into the Twin Cities, doing some private events here, and then going to Rochester for a campaign rally.
Yep, that's it.
It's a fact. Actually, I think right now I was seeing some Twitter traffic from our reporters that are on the field or in Rochester right now. Looks like Democrats are having a parade. Do you have any context, Brianna, about like sort of what the day is going to look like in Rochester before we get to our first questions?
I mean, I think you're going to see protests on both sides. You know, I think the potential Kavanaugh vote and the FBI investigation sort of slowly being rolled out has really made that a heightened issue and focal point for people on both sides and people who will be outside of the rally tonight. And I think we'll probably hear the president address that tonight as well. So I think that's really top of mind for a lot of people.
Absolutely. And I thought it was interesting that, so Trump was here. Last time he was here, it was in Duluth.
In Duluth in June, yeah.
And the Democrats also had a protest at that point, but it was at the site of where Trump was, where his rally was. But the Democrats have taken a different tact this time in Rochester, where they're actually doing a parade that's away from the venue. They're trying to, I guess, maybe avoid confrontation. I would imagine that there's still some potential for confrontation. I know that there will probably be protests at the event. But then I also saw that the Democrats were trying to do this as like, let's go door to door, let's take action, let's not waste our time on the president, and let's like try and get out the vote.
Right, so it's turning into sort of a campaign event and a parade. The parade, and then also getting out, like you said, to every door in Rochester.
Yeah.
Starting a conversation with people.
Yep. Exciting. That'll be exciting to watch, and we'll have more along the day as the news unfolds out of there. We'll have live coverage on nprnews.org and also on air. I understand that we've taken the decision or made the decision on NPR News to carry the president's comments live. So stay tuned with us there. Like I said, throw your questions below and we will get to them. A couple questions out of the chute here. This one is from an anonymous asker. So you can be anonymous if you go through our Harkin form. You can do that. Why isn't Ellison is actually Ellison, I think they're talking about, being investigated for abuse?
Well, that's, he is, and I think he isn't. I think one of the things that have come up this week is that Democrats in Washington are calling for Kavanaugh to have an FBI investigation, and there are a lot of Republicans and other people saying, why not the same for Ellison, who is facing an allegation of domestic abuse from an ex-girlfriend, Karen Monahan, which has been out there since even before the primary. And he's denying the allegation. Actually, this week, the DFL party, it sort of leaked in a strange way to a reporter. They had hired an attorney right after the primary to look into the allegation, an outside attorney from another firm. People called into question whether that was really outside because the firm had ties to the party, but that report was leaked and did not substantiate the claim. So now the party is seeking a local law enforcement agency to have the final word on this investigation and to do more what a criminal investigation would look like. They're having some trouble finding a law enforcement agency to do this, so they asked the Minneapolis city attorney first, but they had a conflict because Ellison's son, Jeremiah Ellison, is on the council, the Minneapolis City Council, which oversees the city's attorney office. So they declined. They asked a Dakota County attorney to look into it, but they also said, there was no criminal complaint filed, so it's hard for us to start an investigation. So they declined, and now it's being sent to the Minneapolis law enforcement, who also declined due to a conflict of interest. But it sounds like there's some conversations going on, but we don't really know if it will if there will get some kind of full criminal investigation before we get to the election, because it's getting kind of close here.
Yeah. Unless if you could do an expedited one like the FBI has done this week.
You absolutely could. People will call into question, I think, like they have with the FBI, if it's thorough enough, too, which is what you run the risk when you do sort of abbreviated, hurried looks at pretty complicated allegations.
Yeah, absolutely. And so then also I saw an offer from Karen Monahan that she would show up. She tweeted to various television networks that she would show up on air with Keith Ellison if they were willing to have them both on at the same time. Is there anything going on there?
I don't think that that's something the Ellison campaign is going to seek out or be a part of at this point. I don't think they want to directly engage in a debate format. Karen's certainly offering that, and she's been very active on social media since she first came forward and tweeting her own sort of medical records and messages that she exchanged with the congressman over the years. So she's definitely using her voice on social media in that way, but I haven't heard of any kind of live debate or interaction between the two of at this point.
And Craig, the latest, we had some recent numbers on the Ellison race for his running for AG. What did those numbers look like?
Well, Ellison was ahead, but not by a whole lot. It was the closest race that we were tracking, the two Senate races, the governor's race, and we had the DFL candidates ahead in all of these races. But for the Attorney General's race, that was the closest one that we were tracking. And interestingly, I mean, if we really want to get into some weeds for a moment here on these allegations, I mean, it's such an interesting parallel with what's going on at the federal level and what's happening here in the state. And, women tend to lean liberal or a little bit more Democratic. And so, the national story, women have this outcry against what's going on in the Kavanaugh hearings. Here in Minnesota, though, women are leaning Democrat, and Ellison is a Democrat. And so we had these really interesting poll findings where we asked people if they believe the allegations against Ellison, and women were less likely to believe them than men. And it was just really weird, dynamics going on with all these different allegations flying around. Normally, you would have more women believing the accuser. In this case, because of political leanings, I guess, we had the opposite happening here.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
That's some real weeds for everybody on Facebook. Hope you enjoy.
Yeah. Enjoy the weeds. Come to NPR News.
Right.
Well, that's great. I appreciate that context. So we have another question here. This one's from David. He wants to know, do illegal immigrants get to vote in Minnesota? Why do we, Minnesota, not require voter ID at the polling place? Do you care to address those?
Yeah, I mean, you're not allowed to vote if you're a non-citizen constitutionally. That's the way it's been. And Minnesota actually did have a ballot initiative to be a voter ID state in 2012, but it was pretty resoundingly rejected by the voters. And that was unexpected. I think it polled really well. And the question hasn't really been raised since it was defeated. I think a lot of people felt like that was sort of the voters. That's them speaking in unison on that issue. But it does come up sometimes with different candidates for Secretary of State and with the legislature. The Republican legislature could potentially pass something like that in the future. So the conversation's ongoing, but since the 2012 amendment, it's been fairly quiet.
And for folks that, early voting is going on right now, and what do you actually need, whether you're early voting or voting on Election Day, what do you need to have in line in order to cast your ballot?
Right. You need to register, so you need to be a citizen for at least a few months in the state. You need to be 18 or older, and your ID is the easiest way to register to vote, but you just have to show that you live here. You have to show proof of residence. That could be a bank statement. That could be some kind of mortgage payment or rent payment. You could even have someone vouch for you at the polls saying, they live here and I know them, they're my neighbor. If you, for some reason, don't have all these other kind of documentations that you have, you could use a student ID, saying I live here and I'm on campus here. Your tuition payment. documents. There's all sorts of things you can use to prove that you live here, and you have to have just lived here for a few months to be able to vote, and you have to be a citizen of the United States. But you can register day of at the polling place in Minnesota, or you can register ahead of time. A lot of people don't know that. A lot of states you have to pre-register. You can't go up to the polling place and take care of that all in one act before you vote. But a lot of people are using the convenience of early voting, where you just make sure you're registered online, and you can go online in that same right after you register and apply for an absentee ballot, which gets sent right to your house. And you can sit in the comfort of your home with another registered voter, submit your ballot, and mail it in. It's pretty easy, and a lot of people are using that option.
And you had a story on that recently, or at least you were tweeting about the numbers of early voting.
Yeah.
What can you give us an update on that?
Yeah, we're now in the second week, and I think we just got some new updated numbers, but I'm not going to remember exactly what they are off the top of my head. But in the first week alone, we saw a 200%, nearly 200% increase in ballots being accepted already at the Secretary of State's office, and a just nearly as large of an increase in people requesting ballots. It takes time to request a ballot and then get it and return it in. But already to see a 200% increase I think it shows two things. People know more about this new early voting option. It's only been around for a couple of election cycles. So it's always going to go up somewhat as people get more familiar with it.
Sure.
But also that people are really excited about this election, and there are a lot of races that people care about. And the parties are being really aggressive in trying to get people to vote early too. I know people are getting mail that says, "Hey, apply right here, send this in, and you can get your early ballot." The parties are trying to send you the application to your house, which is really interesting. And because a vote in the can early is even more secure than waiting till election day. Anything can happen on election day. You could have an emergency. There could be some kind of scare at a polling place. They want to try to get as many people to vote right away as they can.
All right. So, Craig, you have some hot polling data for us, some new analysis on the 2nd Congressional District. Can we talk about that a little bit, and I guess the 3rd as well, before we get into looking at how Trump is faring in the state?
Yeah, we're doing something fun on the APM Research Lab website. We have a little page called Poll Watch Minnesota 2018, and we got some new numbers in just within the last couple of days for two districts, as you said, the 2nd and the 3rd. So you said the 2nd, so we'll start with the 2nd.
All right,
we have
fighting 2nd.
We have Democrat Angie Craig facing off with incumbent Republican Jason Lewis, and the latest poll numbers have Craig up 51% of likely voters, indicating that if the vote were held today, that they would vote for Angie Craig. 39% saying that they would vote for Republican Jason Lewis in that most recent poll, and then down over in the 3rd, I guess in the western part of the suburbs, where we have Paulson facing off against Dean Phillips. The most recent poll there has the Democrat Dean Phillips up by 5 points. 49% of likely voters saying that they would vote for him, compared to 44% with Paulson. Although that one, that 5% spread is really within the margin of error. So I would really consider that one to be a statistical tie at that point. So one of the races kind of loosening according to the poll data, Craig getting farther ahead, and then the other one kind of closing in. So really interesting dynamics going on in these races.
Yeah.
Great. Have you had the opportunity to report on these races recently, or does this polling speak to anything that you're seeing on the ground?
Yeah, I think both of those suburban, the 2nd and the 3rd, they're suburban congressional seats, and they're both seats that voted for, or specifically the 3rd, a seat that voted for Clinton, but elected a Republican. And those are sort of the contradictions that Democrats are trying to exploit across the country to say, hey, look, there seems to be a conflict here. And really that dynamic is at play in the 3rd District. Eric Paulson is trying to separate himself from the president, and Democrats are trying to tie him to the president, and also calling into question a lot of his past votes. You're really seeing a lot of interesting techniques being deployed in that race as well in terms of attention. You saw recently a Bigfoot ad that went viral, which was basically the message was from the Dean Phillips campaign, the Democrat, where is Eric Paulson? So they interviewed Bigfoot, who was like, I've been trying to hide from people for years. How is he doing it? Kind of thing. Went viral, a lot of earned media in that case. Mm-hmm. It wasn't even supposed to be a TV ad. Now it is going to be a TV ad. So you've seen that throughout the campaign: flash mobs, pontoon rides, dueling TV ads between the two candidates. So I think there's a lot of attention, tons of money going into that one. And the second race is a rematch. It was a very close race between Craig and Lewis a few years ago, and I think we're just seeing that dynamic play out more, but with a shift, right? The president did very well in the state a few years ago. His polling number suggests he's not doing as well as he was in this midterm as he was in 16, which could be helping Craig. Lewis seemed to really be bolstered by the president's support in his district and just in general in that election. So I think you're seeing some of those national dynamics really come down into these two races.
Absolutely. And we will have a debate tomorrow at 11 for the 3rd District. That'll be live here on Facebook, and then we'll carry it on the old-fashioned radio as well. So tune in there. We have a question here from Joe. He's asking about third-party candidates. Are you guys seeing any traction in any of the races right now that we're covering with third-party candidates? I know that there was some indication in, was it the governor's race that you had at least a space for other?
We did it in the polling that we did with NPR News and the Star Tribune, the latest Minnesota poll. We do ask about all candidates that will appear on the ballot, and so we had the third-party candidates. How those polls came out, they were all the third-party candidates were in the very low single digits. So there is the third-party candidates. At least to date, are not gaining a lot of traction among the wide spectrum of voters here in the state.
There was only one who managed to cross the 5% threshold you need to actually be a major third party. You have to have one person statewide get at least 5% of the vote. The Independence Party of Minnesota used to be an official third party because they would have statewide candidates who would run and get that amount of the vote. It hasn't happened, but now I think his name's Noah Johnson in the Attorney General's race is a legalized marijuana candidate, and he has 5% support in the poll. Obviously, that could change, but if for some reason in a tight race like that one is already showing to be, he manages to get at least 5%, that would mean they could be a legal third party in the state. So that's one to certainly watch.
And so, to be clear, they won't. If Johnson in the AG as a marijuana candidate, mm-hmm. if he or independence, is he independence?
He's technically registered as a legalized now marijuana candidate.
Okay,
yeah.
But so they wouldn't reap any of those benefits until after the election,
mm-hmm.
right? So
yes.
It's just all right. We showed up on the board. We're 5%
mm-hmm.
over.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
And then it was the Independence Party previously because of Ventura.
Yes, and a lot of other candidates managed to hit that threshold even after Ventura for years. But I think a few election cycles ago, that didn't happen, and they haven't been able to come back since.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So give us, Craig. Let's go back to the weeds, but this time let's do it on Trump.
Yeah.
And I know that we have some slides here that we can walk you through. It's almost like a vacation with Trump data. But could you just kind of walk us through and give us the context? All right, we're seeing Trump here a couple times. He's coming here in what has been, it's been a very intense political season, but I feel like it's the apex of so many events with, as Brianna mentioned, with, Kavanaugh. The New York Times just did this big investigation about his finance, mm-hmm. but here we have Trump coming to Rochester. Can you help us understand through the numbers why that might be and give us a little context about historically where Trump is in Minnesota.
Yeah, that is one of the features of this poll watch page that I mentioned on apmresearchlab.org. We're tracking candidate polls that come in as well as people's approval of Trump here in the state. And so if we have some of the slides, I think the first one might just show that overall trend line. Oh, no, we're back to the presidential vote 2016. So we are jumping back in time here a little bit. And this is actually a good reminder. People don't always remember how very close the presidential vote was here in 2016. And so we have a lot of people who really like Trump in the state and a lot of people who really do not like Trump in the state. But you can see how that came out. Here we're looking at the Trump vote according to the congressional districts in our state. So in Minnesota, 7th is the district that went most strongly for Trump, won by 31 points. You can see that in the 5th, Minneapolis, Clinton won by 55 points. So there's, obviously big differences compared to where you are in the state. The district at the bottom on the map there, that's the district he's visiting here today, Minnesota's 1st. Trump won by 15 points down there, I think, as you already mentioned. So you can see that there's, broad swaths of the state. It looks like about the same number of people live in each of those districts. So if you just look at the map, there's an awful lot of red there, but it's pretty evenly divided, red and blue, if you look at the actual people.
So similar people, but Trump has the acreage.
Right. Okay. Right. So that's just kind of looking at the votes and how people fell out during the 2016 presidential election. Here's the trend line then of the approval ratings in Minnesota. As you can see that they bounce around. And Minnesota, even though people tend to have this picture of Minnesota as being very blue in our minds, leaning more Democratic, we're actually, this trend line here in Minnesota is very similar to kind of the Trump approval rating nationally. Sometimes people call Trump Mr. 40% because his approval ratings tend to hover right around 40%. And that's the case here in Minnesota. Here we're highlighting a bullet that is from the ground level survey, which is a very comprehensive survey that we did with NPR News about a year ago. And the reason that I wanted to bring up that particular data point, I think if we go one more slide into this, we talked about all these different candidates at the time, and you can see that Trump was among the most polarizing. There's this big gap between Republicans and Democrats in terms of the approval rate there. So that's one aspect of his candidacy. Even if you look at some of the Democratic candidates on that list, more Republicans approved of those Democratic candidates than do Democrats approve of Trump. So he's very polarizing in that way. If you go to the next slide, it talks about reasons for people here in Minnesota. We had this open-ended question. First we ask people, why do they approve of Trump? And then second, why? And we just let them talk. And we put that into categories. And most of the results there was really remarkable, at least at that time. Again, this is from about a year ago. At that time, very little of the remarks had to do with Trump's policies. Almost everything had to do with his style, his way of communicating. Some of the Republicans, you can see, said that his communication style was one of the reasons that they approved of him. But even some of the Republicans said that was a reason for disapproving, and certainly Democrats said that as well. And finally, one more slide I think we have from that ground level. Wouldn't it be nice to know what people in Rochester thought of Trump, since that's where he's having this big rally today? Well, that was a very comprehensive survey that we did a year ago, so we were able to zero in on the Rochester area. And there we see that actually not that many people, his approval rating was below the state as a whole in the city of Rochester, 27% approving, 69% disapproving a year ago. And, some things have changed, but again, that overall line is fairly stable, so it's probably in that same ballpark even today.
And then what I thought was really interesting in our recent NPR News Star Tribune poll is that Trump's approval rating, Rochester is obviously a regional center, a more populous area in a larger congressional district. The cities tend to be a little bit bluer than the rest of the district. But the rest of the district, the southern Minnesota kind of as a whole, according to the poll, I think his approval rating was around 40%, which was lower than other parts of the state. So, that was interesting, and that could be for a number of reasons. I think some people have mixed feelings about the tariffs, especially in that region of the state. So, certainly Jim Hagedorn, the Republican candidate who he's coming there to campaign for, is all in on Trump. He's been talking about Trump since day one. He wants to be an ally to Trump in Congress. But having Trump come visit your district can probably cut both ways, it seems, especially in a district like this.
So mobilizing the Trump base, the hardcore folks, if you can get all those people out and maybe turn off people that aren't into it. But it could mobilize both ways.
And a lot of people say this is going to be a base election, which means that both sides are trying to get their most hardcore people out to vote. So if that's the case, then having Trump come to your district is a good thing.
When you say that this is a base election, are you looking nationally or statewide?
I think nationally and statewide.
Okay.
Midterms are generally lower turnout because there's not a president on the ticket, and that the presidential race brings all sorts of people out, people who don't usually vote in midterm elections. So midterms tend to be more the hardcore activists, or even just the people who are dependable voters every year. So really, when you're talking about the base, you're talking about those dedicated Democrats and Republicans who vote year or cycle after cycle, no matter if it's a presidential year or not.
And even so, Minnesota has basically everything on the ballot.
Right.
This go around.
Yeah. It might be bigger than a base year for sure, I think. But I think both sides know they need to, at the very least, get their base out and hopefully bring some new voters into the mix too.
I have a question here on Facebook, wondering if there's anything going on in the 6th congressional district. Is there any polling data on that, or have you heard anything moving in the 6th? The
6th is one of the, I think, most strongly conservative districts in the state. Tom Emmer represents it, and I believe is fairly popular in the district. He has a Democratic challenger. I believe his name is Ian Todd, and we're going to be doing a debate in a few weeks here on that race as well. It's just one of the harder districts for Democrats to, get a foot in, and it has been for some time. It's Stearns County, kind of central. It's sort of a strangely shaped district now, but it's a lot of central Minnesota. But it's been fairly quiet this year compared to the other races. When you have 4 other races that are incredibly competitive, to have the 6th and the 7th and the 4th be and in the 5th be fairly quiet, you're just not hearing as much about them.
Yeah, it was just, we did, in updating our poll watch page just today, we look at what the national forecasters are saying about each of the races in Minnesota. And just like you're saying, the 6th was, solid Republican, all of the forecasters. And for example, 538 puts a percentage, and it's 99.9% that they're predicting that will, stay Republican. Just as the 4th and the 5th, they're making those solid Democrat predictions there.
Sure. So I have a question from Kurt here about polling methodology. He's wondering if the methodology has changed or adapted since 2016. Just saying that our pollsters attempted to account for the shock of 2016 results, but the polling was actually on point in the sense of the popular vote, correct, for 2016. So Clinton won the popular vote. So the pollsters were correct, but they just kind of messed up in terms of how the Electoral College would adapt to that. I don't know, can you speak to that?
Yeah, certainly. I think as any field, the field of polling continues to adapt, and certainly in light of the 2016 elections, that they're trying harder than ever to get things right. And for example, they were already reaching out to a lot of people with cell phones at that time. That is continuing to be a huge emphasis among pollsters: is how do we reach people who are hard to reach on their phones. But all signs are that they're going to do at least as well this year as they did in 2016. And 2016 was not as bad as most people think it was. Just wanted to look into the camera and say that, because there is a perception that even if you're a couple percentage points off, if you're a couple percentage points in the wrong way, you really got things wrong. When really wasn't that far off when you look at back at those details.
Does that keep you up at night, given how many tight races we have here in Minnesota?
Here in Minnesota, yeah, it is interesting to see these new polling results come in. As the two that we just mentioned, it doesn't necessarily keep me up at night, but it does make things exciting.
Right. Yes. More questions from the peanut gallery, I guess.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you both for joining us here for Ask NPR News. Another exciting round. I'm sorry, Corey, that this wasn't exciting for you, but maybe next time ask us a question and we'll get to it. Anyone, feel free to comment on this thread and we'll join you next week. Be sure to tune in to the 3rd District debate tomorrow right here, Facebook Live on NPR News. That's at 11 a.m. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.